houses, but I didn't know that they had their own little hammocks, which I think is absolutely adorable. So let's get back to the original, to the Aztecs. They were coming from a mythical land up north, and they were told that if they get to a lake with a cactus and an eagle that's devouring a snake, this is where they're supposed to settle. And here we go. This is Lake Texcoco, and here's that island in the middle of the lake, and this is where they built their capital, called Tenochtitlan. This is, they had already all the causeways, so, eventually when Cortés showed up later than Columbus, and he showed up on the mainland, coming in via Veracruz, he eventually found his way to Tenochtitlan, and he couldn't believe his eyes. I mean, this was the largest city in the world and probably the most impressive architecture that anybody had ever seen. The only thing, he had to be a little bit careful about praise, because these were heathens that built all of this. And you couldn't praise heathens too much, because that would have gotten you in trouble with the Catholics, okay? So when he eventually ended up going to the market in Tlatelolco, which that section still exists today in Mexico City, he faced this. And it was all foods that he had never seen before in his life. And, again, here he was like a bit shy with praise, but he couldn't believe how clean the people were. Their personal hygiene was unbelievable. Sometimes they would bathe twice a day. Their clothing was always impeccable white with colors in textiles that he had never seen. So it was quite overwhelming. This is a diorama in the Museum of Anthropology. So if you've been there, I think it's pretty much at the entrance. And here's more. I mean, that was probably one of my dreams, that if I wanted to be at any place, at any time in the history of the world, this is where I wanted to be. Okay, here we have all the chilies on the ground, and also they had, like, for instance, inspectors come around. It was all very, very strictly guarded, very regulated, and which, today is not always the case. So where did all this food come from? Where was it grown? And most people know that maybe it came from Xochimilco, from the Chinampas, but they call it floating gardens, and they're not floating gardens, okay? They started building, let's see, I have actually a pointer. I'll take this off. This looks kind of silly, hanging here. So they started building like a raft, almost like this, and they filled it up with sand and silt from the bottom of the lake. The lake was not terribly deep. And then eventually, but in order for them to not float around, they anchored them with the ahuetes, these trees, and you can see they have really good roots. And so they're not floating, they're actually anchored down by these, but it makes them look floating because they have the channels, the canals in between, and so you could sort of get the impression that you are on floating, that you're seeing floating islands. This is sort of a layout how it pretty much looks today. There are some people that live there. The Xochimilco Indians live there, and they grow vegetables, and it's incredibly high yield. And for some reason, it has never been duplicated anywhere in the world, even if it's a great method, because guess what? If you look at this, they didn't have to worry about water. The roots would go deep enough to eventually, get water from the lake. And so, here we go. And so here, they had the tajineros, the boats, and they would come every morning. They would load them up with the vegetables and then go toward the populated area of town, or later Mexico City. And here is it's called La Viga, which means the beam. And here's like morning traffic, you can see. And over here, the Vigas are more pronounced, They came from the lake with their boats, and here the people were waiting to be able to buy food. And and provide for themselves, because there were no supermarkets or anything by that time. So let's talk about the most important grains to the Aztecs. Of course, number one was corn or maize, and this is the symbol for the corn. And Mexicans say, I sort of mix up Mexicans and Aztecs, and the locals were convinced that they were the people of corn. And if you look carefully, you can see instead of having ears of corn, they're little heads. And this is from a mural in Cacaxtla, which is a very nice, and it's actually not that far away because it's close to Puebla. And it's probably one of the most undamaged mural anywhere. So here we're ready to plant corn. This is from a codex. The codexes, they're all available on the internet, free of charge, and there are different ones done by different people. And basically, this was a cooperation between local scientists and scholars and Spaniards. This was like, in the beginning, we thought we could work it out together but then it didn't work out that way. But they had all these codexes, and this is from one of the codex. So here is the person, here we go, planting, going with a stick, making a hole and throwing in the kernel. So corn is totally dependent on being planted by man. The reason being, if you know what a corn cob looks like, a dried one, it's about, this big. And it falls on the ground, and there's about 300 kernels on each on these. There are no way that 300 kernels can vie for living on a little space like that, And so that was why it was necessary to plant one plant after the other. But they were very respectful about the corn because, it was their livelihood. And so before they were boiling the corn to make the masa, to make tortillas, they would blow on it and they would say to the corn, "Don't you worry, you'll be good. We're throwing you in the hot fire right now, but you'll be fine. You'll eventually be eaten as a tortilla." And here's, again from the codex, is a mother teaching her young daughter how to make tortillas. And those little curly cues here probably mean that she says something, but we don't know exactly what it is that she says. But it has all the she has her metate, here are the tortillas, and here's the comal, and here's the molcajete. And so, it's very descriptive, and that's how you learn how to make tortillas. So it began all with this little grass here called teosinte, and somehow people picked up on it and decided to develop it. And development was done with selective breeding. It has nothing to do with the chemical stuff that we do today. It was basically at each harvest, they picked the kernels that they liked the best, whatever they needed, and that's what they planted next. And that's pretty much how it took 9,000 years to get from the beginning to here. And we do know now that the corn comes from the state of Puebla, from a place called Tehuacan, where they did find little parts of a kernel of corn that was dated 9,000 years. Now, today, there's always somebody that comes with some new findings. So I'm always saying, as of now, this is what we know. Okay, and so corn, in the meantime, traveled the world and is now the #1 grain crop growing in the world. And it, of course, as you can see on the bottom line, it comes in a lot of different colors. And if you really want to get into it, there's 4,200 documented uses for corn. And it's divided up in food and industrial. So there's a lot of industrial use for corn and, of course, a lot of food use. And there's plenty of information available about that. So when they first started, when the indigenous people had their corn and they first started eating it, or preparing it. The corn is very hard when it's dry. This all applies to the hard corn. The fresh corn, like we know, has a very short window of being able to be used because it either will rot if you don't, keep it in a refrigerator, which obviously they didn't have. So they always waited until the kernels were hard, and that was when they were ready to be stored for a long time. But in the beginning, there weren't any pots and pans and things, so they were just dependent on using fire. And so they would throw the corn cobs, the hard ones, into the fire, and some of them would pop, and then this is how you would eat them. Isn't that adorable? And there's a restaurant in Mexico City that now serves that, and they're serving it standing upright with all the popcorn and with little popcorn around, and I'm sure you're paying an arm and a leg for it. So that is corn, okay? Now, I gave a talk on corn that was 2 hours long, so you can see I'm sort of like, pushing this together. So the next important grain was amaranto, or amaranth. And I'm making due to Martha Stewart. She does such a beautiful job. She made this bouquet, and the flowers here, that's the amaranto. And each one of those dusters, as I call them, they're actually flowers, have between 7,000 and 8,000 kernels. Oh, great, thank you. Thank you. And so here's kind of like a picture. If you look carefully, you find me on the left. You see it? You see me? You see me? Now you see me here? Okay. Well, I have to tell you, this took place in Chicago, okay? And as Alfredo mentioned, that I was working 8 years with Rick Bayless, so we were into it. We did everything. So we planted this in his garden, and then we left it alone, and eventually it wilted, and the flowers, fell off, and snow came along. The beautiful Chicago winter came along. And the next spring, the whole neighborhood was growing amaranto. Out of the cracks on the sidewalk, in everybody's garden within range. And what does that tell you? That is a very, very hardy, plant, because we do not have near any Chicago winters here in Mexico, and it is originally from Mexico. And as you can see, it comes in two colors, in green and in red. So we're back to the codices. Here on the right, the amaranto, once it's dried and ready to be picked, they break it off, and then in order to get these teeny, teeny, teeny little seeds, I mean, they're probably half the size of a mustard seed, okay, the tiny. What they do is they bang it on a petate. This is a petate here, which is made out of fiber, palm fronds, and it has little cracks, and the seeds are so small that they fall through the cracks, and they have a blanket underneath, and they just pick it up. No harvester needed here, Mr. Harvester. And here you can see, to pop the seeds, so the seeds here are popped. You can see how small they are, okay? And in order to pop them, they are putting them on a hot comal, and they have a broom and whisk them back and forth until they're about ready like that. So the Mexicans love this grain because it has a secret. It is a complete food, okay? So it has all the nutrition that your body needs to stay alive. And out of the kernels, and sometimes they mixed in blood. Blood was very important to them because it was life force. Still important, still life force, And they would share it, like sharing bread, Well, when the Spaniards saw this, they thought they were making fun of communion, and they got really upset. The Spaniards weren't that difficult to upset. And so they forbade growing amaranth by penalty of death. Caused a horrible, horrible famine, because they really depended on it. I mean, you can see it was easy to grow. In this area, I was told by an expert that we can have 3 harvests in a year. So, you know, it didn't need much water. I mean, it was like a God-given thing with all the nutrients that you needed. And so they were even considering putting it on the spaceships, I mean, on the rockets or whatever you call them, and because it has all of these nutrition in it, and it's also very light, doesn't weigh anything, which is important for when you go up in space. So here we have, and this is something that too many people know, we have beautiful astronauts, Mexican astronauts. There's about 4 or 5 of them in the meantime. Mr. Jose, Dr. Jose, was the last one that was up for 8 months on the space station. If he wouldn't have made it as an astronaut, he could have been a movie star. Sheesh, hard. And this is how you find amaranto today in the candy called alegría that's put together with nuts and with honey or with piloncillo. Piloncillo came much later, so they had honey, and that's what they were using. They were extremely good beekeepers, and right now they're trying to revive the original strain of bees that they would grow before the conquest. Then the next, related to the alegría, is the quinoa. And that was grown in the high Andes. You can see here's a little lady doing her harvesting. And it, again, has all the qualities that you find in an amaranto. And it was, you know, very, very popular. Oh, I jumped. That's not supposed to do that. We're going back to the, no, wait. I'm not. I should wear my glasses. What do we have here? Quinoa, okay. So that was the next. Then the next one, I don't know why they keep picking tiny seeds, but this is chia seeds, and as you can see, the state of Chiapas gets its name from the chia, which is, Chiapas means chia water. And here, again, from one of the codexes, is the woman basically sort of saying, thanks for the chia seeds. And then we have this hideous thing. Whoever came up with that idea, I don't know. And the chia pet, but it made them big time money, okay? And it's a bit ridiculous. The way Mexicans like it is like they make agua de chia, and the chia seed, when it gets into water, into liquid, develops a gelatinous, cover around it, and that's why maybe it's not the most favorite for a lot of people, because they don't like the mouthfeel. But then you can bake it into your cake and it'll be fine. So this is a breakdown for the chia seeds. And I have to tell you, the first one, it has 8 times more omega than salmon. And I showed this to my students, and this one woman jumped up and looked at me and said, "You're shitting me." You can guess where she was from. I added it onto my English vocabulary. She was a Texan, and she was like totally, oh my God. So I learned that expression. I didn't know about it before. And then, of course, the reason Columbus did take off in the wrong direction was because he was looking for pepper. Well, obviously in the West Indies there was no pepper. There was no pepper in Mexico or anywhere on this continent, period. And so he took back some chili, to Ferdinand and Isabel, and I don't think they were too impressed. But nevertheless, any greenery that was consumed in the New World immediately went to monasteries. And the monks started putting around with them. They were the gardeners. They were the ones that grew things and developed things, from if you wanted bigger cucumbers, they took smaller cucumbers and waited until they had bigger and bigger harvests and so forth. And so, lo and behold, they liked chili. They thought it had a nice flavor and it had a heat, which pepper also will have. And so they were kind of in favor of it. And so it didn't take that long to eventually develop. And even Columbus decided to go back he went 3 times to the West Indies, and he realized that the people were calling these what he called peppers. They were calling them chili. And so he came up with this glorious idea of calling them chili pepper, which is double naming it, okay? And so I'm fighting every time I give a class, it's not chili peppers, it's chili, okay? Period. And so here we go. So here we have chili. The dish up here is the Texas dish, and it's called chili with an I, and it's made with dried chili with an E, and this is the story about chili. So from now on, I know you'll never say chili peppers again, okay? No. Okay, so here we go, a quick tour of the world, because now that we have chili, we did not have chili anywhere in the world until Columbus dragged this chili pepper back to the West Indies. Today, I had a fight with an Indian student, and he accused me of lying. No. You know, chili are from India. Okay, you go and do your research and come back and tell me, and I'll be glad to listen to you. So here we go. India, Thailand, Sichuan, Hungary, Turkey, Spain, New Mexico. This lower picture apparently was taken at the plant that makes the sriracha sauce. I don't think I would want to be the person loading them in there. But you can see from the chili, they also developed the bell pepper. So it's a derivative that has been bred on purpose. So the next big thing that was nowhere in the world and is strictly from here are beans, frijoles. There are 3 types of beans that are not from here, and those are garbanzo, and black-eyed peas, and fava. Those were from the old world, from Mesopotamia or wherever they were. But other than that, all beans are from this country. And you can eat them, of course, as we know, you can eat them fresh, and they look beautiful, they have gorgeous flowers, and you then wait until they dry, and this is how you can store them for a very long time if they're stored properly. The next item are potatoes. And being German, we love potatoes. Oh my God. And look at the pretty flowers it has. And so they're from Peru, and here the International Potato Center in Peru has identified 5,000 different varieties. We're stuck here with this. And I don't get it. I don't get it. They have no flavor. You cannot make mashed potatoes with them. If you make a casserole, it takes 5 hours for them to get ready. I mean, this is a typical European potato harvest. So I don't get it, but I guess I'll just have to keep bitching about it. So in the Andes, they have an advantage that they have very high altitude and temperatures, and they have a way of freeze drying the potatoes and making it into chuño. And they still use this today. It dissolves with water, and you can make a stew out of it. And the Spaniards that traveled to Peru discovered this, and it was a blessing for them for their sea voyages. They could take these, load up on these, and have nutritious food, and they wouldn't have vitamin deficiencies or die from vitamin deficiencies. So that was a blessing for them. However, in Ireland, they weren't so lucky. The potato, became a blight, and they grew nothing but potatoes, and that shows you monocultures are not a good idea. We got to have diversity. And so what they had in those days, what they called the coffin ships, the people, you can see they're clamoring to get all of these, to get to the America, and the providers of the ships, and it's pretty much the same like the boats for the refugees today going across the Mediterranean. They have no food, no provision for the people, and if they starve, so be it. And so 2 million immigrants went on those coffin ships, and most of them never made it. except we have a wonderful example of this, the descendant of those immigrants became a president of the United States. Okay, so here we go. The next thing that's from here is the sweet potato, or the camote, and for us people a little bit in age, they're supposed to be very, very good for us, for bones and for everything. So eat your camote, okay? And I don't know if you did a school project like this. You stick a camote in water like that and it grows. And they come in 3 colors. They come in white, orange, and purple. And the next, here we go. This is in Puebla. Most Mexicans like their camote like in syrup, okay? And a friend of mine told me that the big thing for him was, before he would go to bed, was a camote, like a candy camote in milk. And you know, like you get cookies and milk? Well, they got camote in milk. And he said it was delicious. And in Puebla, they have endless amounts of sweets, like you can see here, that are made with camote. And this is my favorite man, the camotero. The camotero, he cooks camotes in this contraption. You can see the fire below, you know. And then when they're ready, you get to eat, they're soft and you get to eat them, and they pour evaporated milk over it. It sounds pretty awful, but it is delicious. I wish we had one here. I wish we had one here, you know. So when I saw him showing up, and they have a whistle, because when they let, huh? There was the camotera in Puebla. Yeah, and so I was sitting on the bench, kind of taking a rest, and I heard this whistle. See, like they have this, when they let out steam, it creates a certain whistle, and you know the camotera is coming. And I jumped up, and I go, oh my God, oh my God. And he put it out for me, and I was just ready to sort of grab it and walk away, and he gave me this look like, aren't you going to pay, lady? Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I was just way too excited about this. You know?
They're just cooked, no sweet, no nothing. They're just hot.
Well, the camote is pretty sweet on its own.
No, I know. They don't put anything else in.
No. I mean, I've had them with just sweetened condensed milk, which, I mean, it's a great combination, trust me. Trust me. I've eaten a lot of strange food all over the world. This is delicious. So here we go. The next, of course, is the avocado. As you can see, there have been a lot of varieties of avocados. I love the graphic of that one. And so here we go. This is in Uruapan. It's the capital of avocados for Mexico. And annually they have like a big conference and everything. And the one avocado that is grown the most now and is like 80% all over the world. And the avocado likes to grow in a belt of sort of semi-tropical climate. So it's pretty much taken root all around the world, from Israel to Africa, you name it. And so here's the Hass avocado. And it has a thick skin, so that means it travels, because a lot of other avocados, if you've ever seen any different, like the Fuerte and stuff, I mean, you can easily just punch a hole in it, and then that's not good for travels. And it had a nice creamy texture. And the Hass name comes from Mr. Hass in La Habra. He was a mailman. He was bored with his job, but he had to do it, and so on his way, he kept playing with these avocado trees that he grafted with different brands. They don't know anymore today. They think it was 3 different brands. They don't know anymore today which 3 brands that was, but eventually Mama Haas had root rot, and they had to cut her down, and supposedly a part of her trunk is in the Smithsonian. So if any of you go to the Smithsonian, and you see it, will you please take a picture? I'd like to see it. But you can see it. This is a residential area. He didn't have a garden or anything. He was just sort of on his way to delivering mail, that he played with that. So we're moving on to the next food, peanuts. Peanuts are from Peru, and they're called mani in Peru. And so just in case you're inclined to take up a collection for my birthday, I wouldn't mind having a copy of this necklace. It's gold and silver, and it's about 2,000 years old. It's from the Moche culture in Peru, which was the coastal culture. And they actually have a lot of sculptures of foods, and I find those a lot more accurate than some drawings sometimes, or the sculptures. The peanut is a very strange plant. There are no flowers in this year, but they have little yellow flowers, and then at one point the flowers shoot these shoots out with a seed at the end, and this shoot is just a plant thing, It digs itself into the ground, and as you can see, each seed then develops a peanut. And I don't know of any other plant that will do that. And just to think about that, these shoots are actually just a fiber that's not very strong, that this kind of just was able to dig itself into the ground, It's to me, it's totally amazing. And so eventually when the plant is big enough, I think they grow about this tall. And you know who our most famous peanut planter was? President Carter. And he sold his peanut plants to not have an interest of conflict when he became president. Very novel idea, right? So when you pull out the plant, you can see the peanuts hanging on these threads, and that's how they're being harvested. Now, one person that is not much talked about and is my absolute hero is Dr. George Washington Carver. He was a freed slave. He had a horrendous upbringing and young life as a freed slave, He was not treated well, but he became a scientist, and he was particularly interested in peanuts because he kept urging people, especially the black people, the slaves, to grow peanuts because peanuts restored the soil. Cotton, which they were usually growing at the time, depletes the soil in no time, And so eventually he took out some 141 patents for about peanuts, and he developed peanut butter. And it was developed not for the kids to have a good time with jelly, it was developed for people that had no teeth. And so for them to have nutritious food, they could eat their peanut butter. And eventually the United States honored him with a stamp, which I thought was kind of nice, okay? And here we go, tomato. I know a country in the world today that thinks they own the tomato. Italy, okay? No hostility here, but please, And no, it's from here. Well, you have to realize this is probably from a Dutch painting, and the tomatoes are already pretty big. Anything that was edible and people gathered, they were hunter and gatherers, was tiny. And so the little beginnings was probably what the tomatoes looked like when they were starting to pick them and eat them. And now, of course, we have wonderful heirloom varieties, and especially in the U.S., like when I was with Rick Bayless in Chicago, you wouldn't believe the tomatoes I have eaten because he grew a lot, and he knew people that grew a lot, and so we had platters with sliced tomatoes that were just unbelievable. And then we have the tomatillos. The tomatillos haven't taken on a popularity as the tomatoes, and they again started small here in the where are we? Oh, we're way up there. Here. This is probably, and they still have the small ones, and they're called jitomate verde or jitomate de milpa, and they grow in between the corn. And you can still see them sometimes at the mercado, and they're almost twice the price because it takes double the time to pick them. And we have a cousin in the U.S., I guess in the Midwest, and that is the ground cherry, and it's sweet, and it's very delicious. Squash, and now here you can see a replica of a squash in clay, and you can see it's much more true to the actual shape and everything. And squash were used fresh, with the, that's when the squash was baked in piloncillo or honey, and they were then also left to ripen until they were dried, and they were turned into containers of all sorts, for keeping liquids, for carrying things, and mainly also for eating. Fresh, we have them as calabacitas. That is how they looked to begin with, little round things that look about the size of a tennis ball. And I always say they went to Italy and had a session with Mr. Armani and came back as zucchini, okay? And we love the squash blossoms, and they have little tendrils around them. They're called guias, and that also makes a delicious soup, sopa de guias. But I have to tell you a fun story here. This is how they sell them at the wholesale market in Mexico City, bunches, okay? And so my friend Ricardo Munoz, who is a well-known chef in Mexico City, was invited in New York to guest chef at a fancy restaurant. And he thought, we'll make like squash blossom soup. And he put 2 kilos, 4 pounds of squash blossoms on his shopping list. So he said the next morning they came along with little boxes, and they were just lining them up and piling it up and all the way to the ceiling. And he realized in New York, the squash blossoms were sold like orchids, and each blossom had their own box. He said it was the most expensive squash blossom soup he'd ever made in his life. But, I mean, like when he told us the story, we just laughed because we'd been to the market. And, 2 kilos is not a big deal. You buy 2 of these bunches and, you're done with it. So one of the vessels that are used for eating is the jicara. And this comes from the calabash tree. I haven't been able to find out if the calabash is actually edible or whether they just use the outside. It's very hard, durable, and it withstands a great amount of heat. But of course, like everything, we can't stop embellishing it, So they get carved, and they're very, very hard. So to be able to, carve these fluid, beautiful designs on the outside, you have to be quite a master at doing that. So if any of you have plans to go to Oaxaca, they have a festival right now for traditional cooks. So you can have the tejate in a jicara that's painted, and it's kind of like a chocolate, foamy chocolate drink. It has a chocolate flavor in it. And this is another thing. It comes from the highlands of Oaxaca, and Mr. Gaucho Pin here was very enterprising and relocated a restaurant into Oaxaca. And what they do is they fill up the jicaras here with shrimp or fish that are sweetwater fish, because up in the highlands they have no ocean, And then they put in tomatoes and chili and water, and then they have stones, river stones that are about the size of a tennis ball, and they heat them. You can see the fireplace right behind them until they're almost red hot, and they throw them into that soup. You had it? Yeah, it's to die for. Did you hear that? You have both of our, testimony. They're to die for. And just to see them throw these stones into the soup, and then it just fiercely boils, And he brings about truckloads of river stones, because those are the only stones that will withstand the heat of being hot enough to do this, So some person, I won't name anybody, tried with the local stones. They cracked. Okay, so let's see what we have. Well, this is now my biggest chapter of the whole talk, the maguey, because it is probably the most amazing plant in the planet, not just Mexico, on the planet. They even have their own goddess, the Mayahuel, here. She's kind of a fierce lady. They're also referred to as century plants, and eventually once a century. They bloom, and after that, as you can see, they look pretty sad here, they die. But that's a long time, you know. So here we have the flowers, and then we have the fruit. They come in green and red, and to confuse us, they're called tunas, okay? So if you see somewhere like a tuna sandwich, not fish, not fish. And then look at how easy it is to plant them. You just stick a leaf in the ground, and you have this field of growing maguey. In the market in Mexico City, the wholesale market, they stack them like this. Isn't this amazing? It's so accurate and so beautiful. And they have this piece of cariza, which is similar to bamboo, and they cut it into with 3 or 4 prongs, and this is how they get the fruit down, because everybody has what do you call them, like stingy things. And here they're being defanged, as I call it. They will actually take off the stingy part for you. And if you don't have a pot, like a Le Creuset pot that you bring for $250, you cut open a bit penca, as they're called, a big nopal, and you hollow it out and you put your dish inside, sew it back up and throw it in the fire. And afterwards, you can throw the dish away or compost it, and that's it. No washing up dishes, okay? It's extremely, extremely beneficial for your health, and they're trying to get Mexicans now to consume more and more nopal because of the epidemic of can't think of it right now, the disease that kills people. Diabetes. Jesus. My brain was just sort of, it's over here, Kirsten, okay? Anyway, so it's very heart friendly, that you can make drinks out of it with it, you know, like if you mix it in with other herbs, it's very delicious. And there's a sophisticated terrine made with tuna that is just gorgeous. So here we get to the aguamiel, and Jim and Alfredo have named their home and their property, their farm, whatever you want to call it. They have named that aguamiel after this. So when the plant is ready to actually bloom, as you saw in the first image, they hollow it out on the inside, and it starts leaking or developing what they call aguamiel. And it's very nutritious, and if you drink it when it's fresh, and they used to give it to children, which was, you know, very good for them. It's a great drink, but it doesn't last like that very long. It ferments very quickly. And here you have, if you can see it, the tlachiquero. He has like a gourd that has a hole on both ends, and he siphons out the inside, puts it then in this container. Usually that used to be sheep's skin and pig skin, and now of course we have plastic buckets, and then it gets to go to the hacienda, fermented and sold as pulque. And didn't take the Spaniards very long to figure that was good business. And here in Tlaxcala, where there were a lot of pulque operations, they built the most incredible haciendas. And here's a fermenting room. They wouldn't let us in there because they don't want anything to interfere with the culture of the fermenting. And here is somebody using the leaf to drink out, you know. So the next thing that we use for the maguey is barbacoa. And sometimes this barbacoa is misunderstood. It's not barbecue. What they do is they dig a pit, make a fire, and wait until the pit is like really blazing hot. Then they line the pit with the maguey plants, and the plants have been softened over the fire, and they wrap meat inside, and that gets thrown into the pit, and the meat is on a rack over a dish with water in it, and beans and vegetables, and, you know, things that make it flavorful. And the only reason I go to the Tuesday market is to have my barbacoa, my taco de barbacoa, and what they call a consomme, which is the juice from underneath. And trust me, it's beautiful. And if you go to the Tuesday market, they're not that easy. I mean, they're easy to find because they're very popular. If you're in Mexico City, you want to go to Arroyo in Tlalpan, which is a restaurant that started as a roadside stand and became bigger and bigger because they made very good barbacoa. And when I was with Rick Bayless, we filmed there, and I had the job of getting information wherever we went of the operation, and so I had to ask about these papel picado. And they are made out of paper, not like you see now sometimes out of plastic. And they said they replace them once a week because all the sides, as you can see here, are open to the wind and everything. So I kind of took it upon myself to count how many that would be. You know, so I counted the rows and how many was in each row, and then multiplied them, went through the whole restaurant, and I came up with 6,500. And they're replaced once a week. That's why I call Mexico the capital of ephemera. So there is a skin on the outside of these pencas, and you can pull them off, and then you can make these little pouches. They're called michote, and you can put meat, chicken, whatever inside with a special sauce. And it now is against the law to pull this off live plants because the plant will die. They do get it from pencas that have been used for making barbacoa. So they can obtain them legally, but you cannot go out in the countryside and start pulling this off a live maguey. That would be murder. Murdering it, and then they're steamed. And see, if you don't have a steamer, no big deal, okay? And then you put a banana leaf on top, and then they're covered with masa and steamed, and when they're done, you break open the masa, and you can see that's what's still at the edge of the pot. And here's a quick trip to some of the subjects. Here, this person, he's scraping a penca, a leaf, that's already fairly dry, and he scrapes out so the fiber stays. And that's what they use to make clothing, to make the shopping bags, the Eastleigh bags. You know, you can still get these at the market. This is probably going to be a little washcloth. This is something I always take home to Europe because it has a history of being part of the maguey, you know. And brushes, and also if you need a sewing needle, the point of a maguey leaf you can use as a sewing needle, okay? And here is a squash container and wrapped shoes, scrubbies, you know, for the bath and so forth. And here is a weaver making one of those little, making one of these little washcloths. So it's, you know, it has served the country very well. Just from, we're still talking about the maguey plant, no? And if they dry out, you can use them as roof covering. And if for some reason it starts leaking in the rain or whatever, you just replace them. The most important part, of course, is tequila. And again, here we have a method where the leaves get cut off and it's left with the inside that's called also a pineapple. And the pineapple are then cooked in ovens with steam or like in Oaxaca, just with fire. And you have different types. We have tequila. Where are you? You have tequila, you have mezcal, you have bacanora, and you have sotol. Mezcal, I think, has been a bit overdone. Mark my words, I think we're done. The next one is going to be bacanora. And there's already a couple here that are making bacanora. It's from Sonora. And you can order it in some restaurants. And it's quite different. The only difference between all of these is the difference in the agave. Okay, So you know, like how they say tequila from Jalisco, it has to be blue agave. And all of these beverages now have their own protection of denomination of origin. So that's a big part of that maguey already. And so here we have another cactus. It's called the bell cactus or bisnaga. And you probably have had it. It's called acitron. Come on. Acitron, as you can see, and that's part of the mixture inside the chile of nogada. It's also in the rosca de reyes, which is the wreath that is sold on New Year's, you know, for 3 kings. And in Germany, I knew it from our Stollen. And because of the name acitron, I thought it had something to do with lemons. And I, you know, later found out. Again, here, this is the problem with all cactus, the cactus growth did not keep up with the consumption. And so what happens is, like, all of a sudden we're running out. They had the problem years ago with the tequila in Jalisco. And now it's against the law to actually harvest the bisnaga. And they give you options that you can put in dried pineapple or jicama or something, you know, but do not use bisnaga. Of course, you can find it in every other store in town. Pitaya, also referred to as dragon fruit. Now, I had a very unhappy woman from Thailand in my class, and she was convinced the dragon fruit was from Thailand, okay? And no, it's not. It's from here, and it's called pitaya, and it's a cactus, okay? So we have jicama. You probably know jicama by now. Have you all had jicama tacos? Yes, okay, I don't have to root for that. I just saw one day on Facebook, somebody said, yes, we now have jicama tacos in Toronto. It travels, okay? Anything good travels very quickly. And then we have chayote. That is not so popular in the US than it would be here. It is from here. In New Orleans, they call it militon, and in South America, it's called chouchou. And here, they deliberately, it's back, growing it on vines where they're easy to harvest. And I tell you, there isn't an Indian curry that doesn't have chayote in it. So, like, this is far removed from here. And there's a big story behind why are they so popular in India. The reason I like them here is because you can stuff them, and when you're having guests over, you stick them in the oven just before eating, and that's it. And it's from the cookbook of Frida's Fiestas, and it's a very nice recipe. So when Columbus ended up in the West Indies, the first thing that they handed him as a sign of hospitality was a pineapple, you know. I guess later they realized maybe that wasn't such a good idea. But anyways, the pineapple became the queen of fruits. And it was coveted mostly by royal households. They built themselves very ornate buildings where they grew them like little orangerie. They had pineapplery, whatever they were called. I never found a proper word for it. And this was one in Scotland, and I guess the Earl was a really big fan, you know. So here we go. Pecans are from here, and this pecan pie, when I was working with Rick Bayless, it wasn't uncommon to get a call from the airport from somebody that had a layover, and like, can you please deliver us a pecan pie to the airport? You know, we're having a layover. That has been on the menu for 35 years. His first restaurant has just celebrated 35 years. That has been on the menu 35 years. It's good. It's good. Then we have the passion fruit. Here it is. Yeah, we're going. And this is the flower of the passion fruit, which is actually very exotic. We have the papaya, we have the guava, and we have the cherry moya. I experienced cherry moya for the first time. It's also called custard fruit in Japanese restaurants. They cut them up, they put ice cubes on top, that's your dessert, okay? And then you get a spoon to eat it. So that was sort of, de rigueur, you asked for dessert in a Japanese restaurant, and that's what you got. Cashew. Cashew is a very peculiar plant. It grows here at the bottom of this fruit that I don't know if they do anything with it. And the Brazil nut grows in this shell, of whatever you want to call it, enclosed area. And they're very, very difficult to harvest and very unpleasant, but they're very expensive. That's why, Then we're going to herbs, plants. And we have the hoja santa. I have never figured out or never found any research why it's called hoja santa. In the native language, it's called acuyo. And there's one right down here in the corner, okay? And it's wonderful with fish. And then we have the epazote, which is usually used for cooking beans. Then we have the cedrón, which is referred to as lemon verbena, which is absolutely delicious. It's from Peru, so all of these are natives. And then we have the chaya. And if you have breakfast at the Hotel Corazon, I think it's called, they actually give you chaya juice, like here this lady's making juice with orange juice, so they grow it there. Allspice is from here, and I always thought it was a mixture of spices before I ever saw a whole one, but it's not. And then stevia. Stevia is from South America, and anything sweet, anything that resembles sugar, is immediately jumped upon by big corporations. And guess who has the biggest thing in stevia right now when you get the little packets? They're probably not even pure, is Coca-Cola. So my advice is grow it yourself. Here, it doesn't take much to grow. It's very easy to grow. You can grow it in a container. Throw a leaf into your iced tea and you're done. And you're not helping Coca-Cola. Jesus. Achiote or annatto is a seed that grows inside these pods. Apparently, that makes that reddish color. Apparently, the color was used to paint pyramids or face paints. Today, it's mostly used in cochinita pibil as a seasoning. And here's a drink from Chiapas that also has achiote in it. The state flower and indigenous flower of Mexico is the dahlia. And there are supposedly 45 to 50 different varieties. It's a spectacular plant, And for some reason, you don't hear that much about this being the state flower because it's kind of overtaken by the marigold, And again, here we have this local flower. It's the flower of the Day of the Dead. And we wouldn't have a monsoon wedding without marigold. I mean, they're overpopulating India. And again, it all goes back to the same story, how these things all ended up in the East. Then we have nasturtium, and they're also called capucina or capuchin cress. And you can see why. This is the hood of a capuchin monk, and this is it's daytime, so it's hard to see that little dot. And then the other flower that is from here, and it gets a lot of publicity right now because of the conflict in the Ukraine. They're the biggest growers of sunflowers to make sunflower oil, and which is kind of sad. In pre-Columbian time, the inside of the sunflower was also made into a dish, so they ate the whole thing. Besides that, they then had the sunflower seeds that they used for making mole and stuff. Chiclets. So here's an Aztec woman chewing gum, okay? And here's a chiclero. It's the chiclet tree, and he climbs up there and he carves channels into the tree, and then the sap, which is kind of whitish, as you can see, runs down and runs into this little bucket at the bottom. And then this gets processed. It's a long process with cooking, drying, and everything takes forever. And so now we have a problem here with this, right? And who are you going to call? Gumbusters. Okay. And this is what gets me. Mr. Wiggly, you know, they have a big presence in Chicago. They have Wiggly Fields, right? They have the office, which is gorgeous. And if you're from Los Angeles, you've probably been to Catalina Island, where Mr. Wiggly had a huge mansion that's very famous. And when Mr. Wiggly III died in 1999, the company was worth $3 billion. That's a heck of a lot of chewing gum. Huh? And you know who thought of that? Santa Anna, who was the president that they had here in Mexico. They say 19 times. I don't know if that's exaggerated, but he was sort of a scoundrel that managed to get himself elected over and over. And he was traveling with Mr. Adams, who was a politician, chewing gum. And Mr. Adams said, "What are you chewing?" He said, "Oh, here, have some. You might like it." Well, Mr. Adams thought the folks up north, they might like this. And he opened up the first chewing gum company, the Adams Chewing Gum. So some people might remember. My trainer says, "Oh, yes, that was my father's favorite." so it's still around, you know. I saved this almost to last because it goes with sweet, is vanilla, okay? It is a vine, but a lot of people say it's kind of like somebody that grows onto other plants. It isn't. It is a vine on its own, but it likes the support of a tree. And you can see, like here on the inside, yeah, here we go. I can't see that dot. You know, it uses other trees for support. And if you want to make your own vanilla extract, you just put some beans inside some vodka, leave it for a couple of months, and you have the purest ever. Because most of the stuff that you grow, that you buy in the store, is not pure. And this is what Papantla looked like. This is where the beans come from. And in old Papantla, they lined the vanilla beans out in the street to dry. We can't do that today anymore. It's the most expensive spice in the world, next to the other yellow stuff. Let me see. Saffron, there you go, yeah. Well, see, like here, the only problem with this vanilla growing, like in Veracruz area, they have mites that are living at the bottom, and they are the pollinators. Well, when they started taking the vanilla tree to other places like Tahiti or Madagascar or Réunion or whatever, they didn't have those mites. And so, like, again, a freed slave came up with the idea of pollinating them by hand. Lot of work. And here we come to the biggest gift of this continent, which is chocolate. And so I just want you to go down here and see, because it's very easy to get confused. So, come on. No, over here. I don't know what happened. Come on. Okay, here we go. It's very easy to get confused with all of these terms around chocolate. Originally, it was called cacao, okay? Like in the whatever they were able to identify from the Mayan ruins is like cacao, okay? And then the coca is referred to the powder that's separated from the beans. Cocoa butter is the oil extracted from the cacao beans from which white, quote, chocolate is made. And chocolate is the drink. Mexicans only drank chocolate. And cocoa are products made from the coconut. And coca is referred to as the cocaine, the bush of the trees, and that used to be the ingredient for Coca-Cola. And on that note, the whole thing was a monkey business. The monkeys stole those pods, broken open, and this is a white, soft coating, and they sucked that off the beans, spit out the beans. And so from the Peruvian Amazon, where the chocolate comes from, it traveled via the monkeys that kept spitting it out, okay? And it eventually came up to close to the Yucatan and the Olmecs, which were the first ones to eventually turn it into something to eat. And so it's all the monkeys' fault, okay? And so here we go, this is it. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Hi, Kirsten. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it today. My staff did a whole number on me right before I came.
I was told you had issues.
There were issues. So when you run a business that exports hummingbird feeders to the States and 2 retail stores and a little bit of everything, there's always issues. I don't know if you guys have known that all of this has been on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Instagram Live, which all of our presentations I'll be coming up. We'll be using those comments coming in on the Facebook page were thank you, Kirsten. Thank you for the we love you. Thank you for this Facebook presentation. Love this. Kirsten is so interesting and knowledgeable. Thank you for this Facebook Live. One person from Mexico City just put the Mexican flag. Another person watching here. So really exciting that a lot of people were watching in all different places. So on Instagram, the presentations are just there in the Instagram feed, and they stay up for just a little while. On Facebook Live and on YouTube Live, you can watch them after today. So if you know of somebody that missed it today, or you know of somebody that would love to see Kirsten's presentation, you should be able to do it. This is all new to us. We had some audio problems with Instagram Live today, but that's okay because it disappears in just a few minutes. So, but you should be able to watch both the YouTube or the other one later. So Kirsten, Alfredo and I met Kirsten 13 years ago. How long ago? 14 years? Longer, 15 years ago, at a reception for Gorky Gonzalez, the famous potter. And Gorky told us, you have to get to know Kirsten. She's one of the smartest people in Mexico regarding food, and we've been great friends all these years, and we're very proud of her with her cooking school. Does anybody have any questions right now for Kirsten? It's a long presentation with a lot of information. Anything that Kirsten missed? Oh, here we go.
No, I told him in the beginning, I told everybody that this was called from a 4-hour presentation, okay? So there are a lot of, just in case you might wonder why everything ended up in Asia that I was talking about, including our turkey and everything. It was because when the Spaniards discovered the port of Acapulco, they started sailing from Acapulco to Manila, and they were referred to as the Manila galleons. And a lot of things hitched a ride with the Manila galleons, like the turkeys and the chayote and the dragon fruit. And that's why it became so popular there. And it took a while to get back home, you know. So that was the story behind these fruits that ended up in Asia.
You had a question?
I loved your presentation. Just curious a little bit about your cooking classes and field trips and dinners. Is it all on your website, or how would we find out more information?
Oh, yeah.
Perfecto, gracias. What are you free?
And Kirsten was the reason why I got to meet one of the inspirations in my life, Diana Kennedy. Kirsten actually made it happen, put us together finally after a lot of attempts that always failed, but it's Kirsten that put us together after all these years. Long friendship, and one of the most important people, you know, one of the most important people in Mexico regarding food, and we're all very grateful and thankful that we've gotten to know Diana over these years. She's 99 now, so it's quite a life lived. Any other questions for Kirsten? In the back.
So you came over to the States when you were 28.
Yes.
And what brought you?
I was
the
a
States.
nanny.
You were a nanny.
Yeah, I had an education as a pediatric nurse, and whenever we graduated, there were American ladies waiting outside to hire us to come as nannies, and that's how I came to San Francisco as a nanny.
Oh, we went to the Bay Area.
Yeah, San Rafael.
San Rafael.
Yeah.
But she has had a very interesting life. She has cooked for many, many people, including Mick Jagger and a lot of other interesting people. Uh-huh. Yes. Actually, before I became vegan, she had us over at her place once, and she had a soup made out of the flowers of the yucca plant, which now we grow in our place, and we cook it. We make a lot of different things with that flower, but she's the first one. And the chirimoya that she showed, this is a chirimoya tree.
This is the time of year that it loses its leaves before it starts releafing again. Our problem with this chirimoya is that when we had the restaurant under here, when the fruits get really heavy, they just drop without warning.
And it was a bit dangerous to hit someone.
Yeah, it's just like they're really heavy. So any other questions from Kirsten? Let me take the microphone. We have a thank you, Kirsten. The heat is really tough this time of year, and thankfully with the Facebook Live and all the other ones for the people that just couldn't make it today, they saw you in another way. So we're very excited about that. In 2 weeks, we will have the poet Mary Catherine Wainwright will be reading her poetry in 2 weeks from now. So you'll get if you're not on our email list, you'll get an announcement for that. And this is the reason why we're doing this right now, is that even in the heat, which we're all suffering from in San Miguel right now, you can enjoy it however you'd like to. Here, with wonderful fruit waters and other stuff. Always better in person, but if you can't, tell your friends to watch it on our Facebook page, or our YouTube page, or our Instagram page. Okay? Well, thank you very much, and in 2 weeks, we'll see you again here at our salon. Thanks.